Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. You have to put up the noise of the fans, but I'm not turning them off in this heat. Somebody suggested a video, and I'm jumping on it basically. What are my top 10 tips for beginners, people starting out? Well, the first thing I would say is seriously think about what you're getting yourself into. Look around. If you're watching this, you're a YouTube viewer. Yeah? Whether you make videos is irrelevant. You watch videos on YouTube. Yeah? Think seriously. Take a step back. What are you watching here? You're not only watching pretty blooms, you're watching the trials and tribulations, things going wrong. Yeah? It's not all roses and sweet smelling stuff. Okay? So think about what you're getting yourself into, and are you prepared to go for it? And at the end of that tip, I would say go for it. I mean, when I started out, I didn't know much about orchids. In fact, I'd probably go as far as to say I knew very little, but I still had a go, and you will learn on the way. So first of all, think seriously about what you're getting yourself into. Yeah? Having got that out of the way, we'll assume you've made the decision to get some orchids together, a form of collection. Now, a collection can be 2 or more, I believe, technically speaking, but I can reasonably assure you that it will probably grow. Yeah? So, tip number 2, have you got room? These are not your normal tips. Most people say go and buy this orchid, go and buy that. First of all, yeah, tip number 2, have you got room? Yeah. So, question, where are you going to put these orchids? Now, the simple answer to where am I going to put this one orchid is probably easily solved. And maybe even this second orchid and this third orchid that somebody gave me as a present. And that's the end of the room on that windowsill. Where are we going to go next? So think ahead. Where are these orchids going to go? Yeah, most people start somewhere in the home on a windowsill, yeah, and it grows until eventually there's no more windowsills, no more shelf space, no more table to eat off of because it's full of plants. I'm not mucking about, this is how it can go. So tip number 2, have I got room for these orchids? Tip number 3, planning ahead with the aforementioned space. Am I going to have a dedicated place for orchids? Yeah, so am I venturing out into some form of grow room which could be attached to the house? Am I going to have a greenhouse? Yeah, am I going to have a place where the orchids will be? Or are they just going to be spread around the house? Now, if you're going to have a place where the orchids are going to be, it can't be just any old place. There's got to be a lot of thought goes into that. So tip number 3, if you're going for a dedicated space, find out about what sort of space is needed. Yeah? If you've got a large open space in a garden and you plonk a small greenhouse in the middle of it and think this is going to be wonderful for my orchids, I would suggest you seriously think again. Yeah, because if there's no available shade for that greenhouse and the sun comes out from dawn till dusk, it's gonna get hot. Overpoweringly hot. The smaller the space, the faster it reacts to temperature changes. So I would recommend, if you're seriously thinking about getting a greenhouse for your orchids, go big. The bigger the space, the easier it is to control. We haven't even got onto the plants yet, okay? So if you're going to have a dedicated space, think about its size, because whatever size you think is big enough, you'll probably run out of space in what will surprise you as a short space of time. Because once you've got the space, you think, oh, I'll have that one, I'll have that one, oh, that's a pretty bloom, I'll have that one. Oh, I've never heard of that one, I'll have that because it's unusual. And suddenly there's no space left. Yeah? So it happens. Look around, it happens. There's more space in here now than there's been for several years. How's that happened? I've been thinning. So anyway, where did we get to? That was tip number 3. If you're going to go for a dedicated environment, have a look round, see what sort of things other people are using, see what sort of space is involved. And the other thing, if you go for a dedicated place to grow for your orchids, be prepared to spend some money, because first of all you've got the place, but it won't be enough to just have a place and put the plants in there. You're going to need some air circulation. Yeah, you're probably going to need some way of artificially increasing humidity. You're going to need some kit. You're going to need some gadgets. So if you go for a dedicated space, be prepared to spend some money. You've got the money and that's not a problem. Just go for it. You're going to create an orchid paradise. And if money's no object, you know, boy, would you like to see the one that I would create if money was no object? Well, first of all, you'd walk in one end and you'd have a job to see the other end. I'm not mucking about. If I had money coming out of my ear holes, it would be like that. Right, tip number 4. You need to think about the sort of orchid you're going to get. Yeah? And before you think about the sort of orchids, you have to go back to this: where are they going to go? Where am I going to keep them? And I would highly recommend you get a couple of these things. Yeah, these are about £6 on eBay, and they give you a temperature reading and a humidity reading, and they also give you a clock. Now, once you've worked out how to program the flipping things and all the beeps that go with that and the swear words, once you've got them set up, they're fine. And the batteries in them last forever. They just keep going. They're great. And although that temperature may not be 100% accurate, it's within a degree or two. It'll do. And the humidity's quite close as well. They're not perfect, but they just work. Okay? So get a couple of those and dot them around in the sort of places you think you're going to have your orchids. Have a look at what your temperature is when the sun comes through that window, and you'll suddenly find that it's way higher than you thought. Have a look at what your low temperature is overnight when you're snoozy in bed and you don't take any notice of the temperature, unless it's hot like it is now and you can't get to sleep. Okay, so find out what you've got in the places you're planning to put some orchids, and do that first, rather than get the orchids and dump them there and find out it's not the ideal place. Work backwards. Yeah, do that. Take a step backwards. Yeah, I know by this time most people have already got their orchids and they're now worrying about them, but if you could plan it, then have a look. Dot a few of these around. Have a look at, you know, what the temperature is on the windowsill. Have a look at what the temperature is on a shelf inside that windowsill or to the side of that window. Yeah, and you need to not only know how high it gets but how low it gets. Yeah, especially if you decide you're going to go for some of the orchids that don't like the bright light, things like the Masdevallias and Restrepias. They can grow in the home if you get it right. Yeah, but you're probably going to be looking at a north-facing room, you know, that doesn't get any sun because it's too much for them through the window. So you've got a nice north-facing room, and you sort of think, well, I've had a look, and it's about 18, 19 degrees in the daytime. I think that'll be great for those sort of plants, but then you find out it goes down to like 3 or 4 degrees overnight because there's no heating in there. Yeah, so check your environment out, and it's always worth checking your humidity. Some houses are just incredibly dry, and some are not so dry. Older places tend to have more humidity around. Shiny new places with all the modern insulation and materials and everything can be incredibly dry. Well, as far as I know, there aren't any desert orchids. They do not like dry air. So if you've got an incredibly dry atmosphere, you're going to need to do something about that. You're going to need to raise the humidity. Lots of different ideas there. Get a fogger, you know, turn your carpet green and get algae up your curtains. That's a great idea, isn't it? But yeah, that's the high end of the humidity adding is a fogger. You can also have humidity trays. You know, you'll see pictures in books and people saying, oh, if you get a little tray under your pot with some pebbles in it and some water, you can raise the humidity for that single orchid. Check it out. You may be lucky and get 2 or 3% increase around your plant. That's if you're lucky. chances are you'll get next to nothing. The evaporation on a tiny little tray with a few pebbles in it and a bit of water is next to nothing. It's not going to make a lot of difference. But if you get a large tray with pebbles in, or leca, and stand quite a few pots on top of those pebbles, not in them, on them, or preferably get one of these types of trays to sit on the pebbles so that you definitely know your pot's not sat in the water, yeah, you can actually raise the humidity a reasonable amount. So think about your humidity. No orchids like really dry air. And the next thing is, no orchids like still air. They like the air to move about a bit. So do we as people, yeah? You know, I get up in the morning and the house is quite warm, so I open the back door, open some windows around the front of the house, and I get a bit of an airflow through, and I feel better. And I know if I had orchids in the house and I felt a bit better, so would they. And there's an old expression, yeah? If you feel comfortable, the chances are your orchids aren't too bad either. Now, I've forgotten whether I've got to number 4 or number 5, so yeah. we might only get 9, we might get 11. Does it matter? It's a chat. Okay, going on to, we've had a look at where we're going to put our orchids and is that place suitable, and if it's not, we can make some minor adjustments. Now, to get some airflow, you don't need giants like this in the house. Little 6-inch fans can move a reasonable amount of air. You don't need a force 8 gale. You just need to gently move the air around. So don't go mad. If all your orchids are angled over at 45 degrees with all the leaves heading off in one direction, you probably overcooked the airflow. Right, so once we've had a look at where we're going to put them and we're happy that it's probably going to be okay with some minor adjustments along the way, that's how it goes. Next we need to think about what sort of orchids are we going to have. An infinite choice, yes or no? I would say in your home the answer to that is no. There is not an infinite choice. There are an awful lot of orchids that are readily available that are not going to do that well in your home. They might survive, but they won't thrive. So you need to pick on stuff that's going to do okay. And the simple answer is stuff that is tolerant. Stuff that doesn't mind ants crawling all over it. Got you. That's 2 on one plant. I know what it is. It's the blooms. They're after the happy sap. Well, that one's not getting any. Don't worry about ants. They really don't do any harm. I just find them incredibly annoying because they distract me. So where was I? Right, types of orchids. Hybrid, store-bought type Phalaenopsis will normally do okay in most places. The one thing you will have to bear in mind is the stores buy them in from import market sources, trade, yeah? And they buy them in bulk. And they've come from mass producers where they have been grown, force-grown, I would hasten to say, under perfect conditions. And they've got these 2 beautiful flower spikes on them, you know, with 12, 15 blooms on each flower spike, and they look stunning. You'll be lucky to ever achieve that again, because you will not get those perfect conditions again. Plus, you've got the growth hormones, the stuff that they can give their plants in their conditions. You're not going to get that. You can't get at it. So you have to make do with less than that. But that doesn't mean to say it's not good stuff. So in the home, hybrid Phalaenopsis will probably do fine, as long as you get your watering sorted out and make sure your media doesn't go all manky and blow your roots and things like that. You'll probably be okay with those. There are quite a few dendrobiums that will probably grow quite well in the home, and the much forgotten Latoria types, yeah, will do okay in the home. They don't need high humidity, they don't like to get cold, and they don't need the really high light that some of the other dendrobiums like. So they probably do fine in the home with a little bit of air movement around them, yeah, and a bit of extra humidity. They'd probably grow okay. Then Dendrobium phalaenopsis type. They come into the same category really. They grow under very similar conditions in the wild. So you could go with those. They'll probably be okay. Lovely blooms, all sorts of colours. Yeah. So there, we've done that. Cattleya alliance. I would steer clear of obscure stuff. I'll just put it into one category, obscure stuff. Yeah. Stuff that you've got a job to pronounce, where if it just says Cattleya hybrid, it's probably okay. Now Cattleyas are going to need a little bit more light than certainly your phalaenopsis and certainly your Latoria dendrobiums. That doesn't mean to say they can't get enough light on a bright windowsill. Just watch the temperature when the sun hits the glass. Not all Cattleyas like 35 degrees. Yeah. So Cattleyas. What else could you try in the home? Paphiopedilums. They don't need the highest humidity, they don't need the brightest light, they don't need high temperatures, they don't like really low temperatures, so they would be okay in the home. They'd probably like the humidity up a bit from a normal room humidity, but we've talked about accommodating that. And quite honestly, when visitors come round and you've got a slipper orchid in bloom, it's a bit of a showstopper. You'll attract people's attention. They're pretty good. What else can you think about? There's quite a few of the Oncidium and Oncidium alliance types that will do quite well in the home. I won't say exceptionally well, but certainly quite well. Some of them like to stay cool, so they won't do that well in a warm room. And you get others that are just finicky, shall we say, like Nellie Islas. It might be just me, but I really have trouble growing those flipping things, and so do some others, so it's not just me. But you know, you've got to sort of play the game. If you can buy an orchid with some pretty blooms on for a £5 or maybe 10 quid, take it home and give it a try. You know, if it dies, you've had some pretty blooms and you've learnt a lesson. It's not the end of the world. So types of orchids. Phalaenopsis hybrids, some of the dendrobiums. I wouldn't go for the winter resting type, trying to grow them in the home. But certainly if you can do the really bright light and the cooler temperatures in the winter, you get rewarded with some of the best blooms, well, in my opinion, in the market. What else could you try in the home? Sorry, I'm looking around what I've got. I mean, there's stuff that I haven't got that you could still try. Some cotyledons. I mean, there's some beautiful blooms in amongst those. Most of them are coolish growers, so they wouldn't take to a bright south-facing window very nicely, but they might take to a northeast or northwest-facing window that doesn't get heated up to human temperatures, shall we say, in the winter time. They might do okay. Very rewarding blooms. So there's an assortment out there, and even though that's only a few types of orchids that I've mentioned, in amongst those types is a multitude of colours, shapes and sizes. Quite honestly, you could have a massive collection of practically all the colours of the rainbow, and certainly sizes, not necessarily shapes, just by having phalaenopsis and sticking to hybrids and not even touching a species. So you don't have to venture out into the obscure and the unpronounceable to have a reasonable collection, and include all the colours available. They say that true blue is not available, and I know it now does. I saw a lecture on some of the Australian orchids, and this was Western Australia too, just sort of a barren patch of scrubland, and in amongst there were some orchids that were true blue. A lovely pale, what I'd call a baby blue orchid. Don't ask me what the names were, I don't know, but these were true blue. Most of what we get that have got the cerulean name in them, which says blue, are not blue, they're purple, yeah? Well, they're magenta, they're not true blue. Victoria regeniae, now that's a cool growing dendrobium, not ideal for in the home, but it would grow nicely in a cool room with a reasonable amount of light. That's supposed to be blue. Well, no it isn't, it's purple. If you get in there and have a proper look at it, it's not blue. Very few true blue orchids. But take that colour away and you can start at white, head off through pink, up into the reds, yeah, into the purples and into the almost blacks. You can head from the white through the pale yellows, into the oranges, into the reds, into the deep reds. And in amongst there you can get browns and you can get greens. They're all there. All the colours are there. And you can have a good assortment. I think that was number 5. Number 6, be prepared to be disappointed. Not every orchid you buy is going to grow well and do well. You're going to get some disappointments. So as long as you know that a little bit of that might happen, you're prepared for it. And it's not quite such a disappointment. I mean, I've got 200 odd orchids in here. There are some orchids in here that are not doing that well, and I am disappointed because they are special orchids to me, and if I lose them I'm going to be quite upset. But they are just plants at the end of the day. They're a living thing, and all living things can and do eventually die. Some people have said, how long can orchids live? And the answer is forever. There is no end time for an orchid. If it's looked after well, kept in the right environment, repotted at the right time, and all those things, it will live forever, potentially. There is no end time. Right, so number 6, be prepared for a few disappointments. Number 7, learn. Don't just pick up an orchid, plonk it on a windowsill, and expect it to be the best orchid on the street. Yeah? To do that, you need to learn a bit. You don't need to learn lots and lots and lots all at once and get a headache. Yeah? Open the whiskey and retire to a dark corner. You don't need all that. You can learn a little bit. A bit at a time. And you'll be surprised how quickly your knowledge will grow. And you can never win. You can never have all the knowledge. But you can have as much as you need for the types of orchids and the number of orchids that you've got. But the learning still doesn't stop. Every now and again you'll hear something that you haven't heard before, perhaps on a YouTube, perhaps at a talk at an orchid society or something like that, chatting to a vendor at a show. You'll just hear something and thought, I didn't know that, thanks. And that just goes into the knowledge pool, little bit. Now at first it does seem like there's an awful lot to learn, and that's probably true, but it tails off very quickly to the point where you can go quite a long time and not pick up anything new. Yeah? But the more you look, the more you'll find. Yeah? Right, where did we get to? I think that was 7, wasn't it? 8. I'll have to make this one up because I'm winging it now. Mix with other people that grow orchids. Try not to work in isolation. The more orchidy type people that you come across and can mix with and can chat to, the more you share that knowledge and that experience and all those years, because you've got an accumulation of years. If I go to my orchid society, you know, on a quiet night where there's perhaps just 30 people there, you know, some people are relative beginners, some people have been growing 50 years. Collectively in that room, if you said they've all shared about 5 years worth, that's 30 times 5 years worth of experience in that one room. And they won't all have the same experience, it'll all vary. Different growing environments, you know, different types of plants, all that sort of stuff. So try and mix with some orchidy people. And if you can't physically mix with orchidy people, well, that's what YouTube's for. We're a family, we mix, we chat to each other, we leave comments, we reply to comments, we watch each other's videos. It's there if you want it. There's some Facebook groups that are orchid related as well. I'm not so keen on the Facebook groups because they tend to turn into slanging matches quite at the drop of a hat, shall we say, which doesn't seem to happen on YouTube, not on the orchid community anyway. But try and find some other people that are interested in orchids to mix with and chat with, share a coffee, share a wine, all that sort of stuff. So that was 8. Number 9, be prepared to change. Yeah? So you may start out thinking, like I did, I love Phalaenopsis and I'm going to have lots of them. Things change. I've now got one that's on its last legs, one that I still like quite a lot, and 1, 2, 3, 4 mounted Phalaenopsis. I've got 6, 5.5, because one's not long for this world, I don't think. And that's out of 200 plus orchids. Once upon a time, I probably had 20 Phalaenopsis and nothing else, except perhaps a Shari baby. Yeah? Things change. Once upon a time, I was frightened to death of dendrobiums, because you hear people talking about this complicated winter rest and the different, they worried me to death until I got some, and I thought, hey, these are for me. And now I've got over a quarter of my collection are dendrobiums. Not that I like them much. Think about it. 200 plus orchids, well over 50 are actually dendrobiums. And a lot of species in there, which I'm happy with. So, yeah, things will change. Your tendencies will change. A lot of people in the UK start off growing orchids in the home and decide to go for an outdoor space, some sort of grow space, greenhouse or things like that. And then they realise how much it costs to keep intermediate temperatures going through the winter in the UK, especially on a hard winter. So all of a sudden the cooler growers get very, very, very interesting. Yeah? So suddenly things like Masdevallias and Restrepias and Coelogenes and things like that become very, very interesting, because they don't cost anywhere near as much to keep going in the winter, because their minimum temperature is so much lower than some of the other stuff. So that's that. And whether I'm up to number 10 or not, this is number 10. Number 10 is choose a range. The orchids basically are always split up. You'll see it in books, you'll hear people talking about it. They're either cool growers, or they're intermediate, or they're warm to hot growers. Now each of those sections have a minimum and preferably a maximum temperature. Now those cooler growers can grow quite cool. You know, so winter temperatures, you can get down 8 or 9 degrees for a lot of those, and they won't keel over. Some orchids can go down near or even at freezing and not die, providing they're bone dry and not wet. Yeah? So you've got the cool growers. The problem with those is trying to keep them cool in the summer, you know, when the old sun's out like it is now. So if you're going to go for those, you need to be prepared to attempt to keep them as cool as possible in the summer. And although they will tolerate a little bit of temperature in the summer, if it gets too bad, they will stall, stop growing, and in some cases go downhill. So that's the cooler end. The intermediate, for me, are the best of all worlds, because although I dropped down to about 12 degrees in the winter in here, I'd like to keep it at 15, but my resting type dendrobiums need that chill or they won't bloom quite well. They may still bloom, but they won't bloom as well as if they get that drop. And a lot of it is just the change in summer to winter temperatures. So I go down to 12. I still class that as intermediate, and technically speaking it is. But I've got some orchids in here that don't like it that cold in the winter. Yeah? So they don't do so well through the winter. They slow right down and stop. It's too cold for them. They don't die, they just don't do as well as they could. And intermediate top temperatures, ideally sort of 25, 26. Ideal at the moment. But yesterday it wasn't, it was 31. That's a bit warm, but very good ventilation and good airflow and quite high humidity will get round that. If you go for the warm growers, then you're looking at really a minimum of 18 through the winter. Yeah? that could get expensive depending on which part of the world you live in. To keep this at 18 degrees through the winter, I would have a heater on probably 2/3 of the day for most days. Not all, because when the sun comes out through the glass it gets quite warm in here even in the winter. But overnight, and don't forget in the UK winter, overnight you're looking at 16 hours of darkness, of cold, where your heater's going to have to maintain that heat. That costs money, so it depends whether you're prepared to put that in. Okay, right, that'll do. But my main tip for beginners is be prepared for some losses and be prepared for some surprises, because you will get them. Things will just come into bloom almost out of the blue. Try and learn as much as you can, but try not to learn it all at once, because it'll put you off. We haven't even touched on feeding yet. And go for stuff that suits the places you're going to grow them in. And check your places out. Get a couple of these and dot them around, move them around, and, you know, see the difference between even one end of the windowsill and the other end of the windowsill. You get a bay window, for instance, that faces south, yeah? Well, the two little bits, the two end bits that stick out, well, one of those faces east and one faces west. I'll bet you anything you like they've got different temperatures, especially at night. Especially if you've got a chill wind, yeah? So you can even get differences on the same windowsill. So have a look around your environment, check that nothing is going beyond what you expect it to do, and move your plants around accordingly. If you got a phalaenopsis, they don't like getting too cold. They like human temperatures, yeah? So if you're comfortable, they probably are as well, yeah? So have a think. And if you've got plants on a windowsill in the winter time, what's the first thing you do about 4 o'clock in the afternoon? You pull the curtains, don't you? Don't shut your plants behind the curtain. The temperature drop overnight between curtains and glass in the winter time is quite dramatic. And you don't know because you're the inside of the curtains. And the other thing to remember in a house is don't put your orchids above the radiator. They do not like that sort of heat, not direct heat directly underneath them like that. And also the same applies if you've pulled your curtains. If the radiator's now behind the curtains and that comes on the first thing in the morning, so it's nice and cozy when you get up, think what the temperature's going to be between the curtains and the window with a radiator trapped in there. These are the sort of pitfalls, yeah? So think about where you're going to put your orchids. It's very important. It's probably more important in a home almost than how you look after them, is where they are. And if you get that bit right, the rest will probably just fall into place. So that's put you all off, hasn't it? See you next time.